The sun was setting over the cracked and dusty landscape of Colorado, casting long shadows across the barren ground. The air smelled faintly of chemicals and decay, a reminder of how far humanity had pushed its home to the edge. Emily Carter stood in her small, dimly lit lab at an underground research facility. Her fingers moved quickly over a keyboard as lines of data scrolled across the screen in front of her. She paused for a moment, leaning back in her chair with a tired sigh. It had been another long day filled with numbers, graphs, and theories. That led nowhere, or so it seemed. Emily wasn't just any scientist. She was part of Project Echo, one of the last hopes for saving Earth from total collapse. For years, people had ignored the warning signs, the melting ice caps, the rising seas, the dying forests, but now there was no denying it. Humanity had gone too far. The planet was fighting back, and every day brought new disasters, floods, droughts, wildfires, and storms unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Governments around the world had thrown money into desperate projects like this one, hoping someone could figure out how to fix what centuries of greed and carelessness had broken. Her eyes flicked back to the screen as something unusual caught her attention. A series of energy readings from deep-sea probes didn't match anything they'd encountered before. At first glance, it looked like random noise, but when she zoomed in closer, patterns began to emerge. Strange spikes of energy pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Emily leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. This wasn't natural. Whatever it was intelligent. She grabbed her notebook and scribbled down some notes, then decided to share her findings with Daniel Brooks, her colleague and closest friend on the project. Daniel was already in the lab next door, poring over his own set of data. He looked up as she entered, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. "What is it?" he asked, sensing the urgency in her voice. "I think I found something," Emily said, holding up her tablet. "Look at these readings." Daniel took the device and studied the screen carefully. His brow furrowed as he processed the information. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered after a moment. "These patterns, they're not geological, they're not even biological. It's like something else entirely." "Exactly," Emily replied, nodding. "I ran simulations too. Rule out interference or equipment error, but everything checks out. These signals are real." Daniel glanced at her, his expression tense. "You realize what this means, don't you?" "If we're right about this, it could change everything," Emily hesitated. She knew exactly what he meant. If their discovery turned out to be true, it would mean Earth wasn't just a collection of rocks, water, and air. It was alive. And not in the way poets talked about nature being vibrant and full of life. No, this was something deeper, more profound. Something ancient and powerful. For hours they debated what to do next. Should they tell their superiors? Or should they keep digging until they understood more? Before they could come to a decision, strange things started happening all over the world. Weather patterns shifted suddenly and violently. Hurricanes formed where none should exist, and earthquakes struck cities that had never experienced tremors before. People reported hearing whispers in languages no one recognized, faint voices carried on the wind. Panic spread like wildfire. As videos of these phenomena flooded social media back in the lab, Emily and Daniel watched the news unfold with growing unease. "It's starting," Daniel said quietly, his voice tinged with both awe and fear. "Whatever this thing is, it's waking up." Emily nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the brink of something monumental. But was it salvation or destruction? As days passed, the disturbances grew worse. Entire towns were swallowed by sinkholes while rivers changed course, overnight flooding areas that hadn't seen water in decades. Scientists scrambled to explain the events, but nothing added up. It was as if the planet itself had decided to rebel against its inhabitants. In the middle of this chaos, Emily received a call from Lieutenant Rachel Morgan, a military officer assigned to oversee Project Echo. Rachel's tone was clipped and professional, but Emily could hear the strain behind her words. "We need answers, Dr. Carter," Rachel said. "People are scared. They're looking to us for guidance, and right now we have nothing to give them." I'm doing everything I can, Emily replied, her frustration evident. But whatever's causing this, it's beyond anything we've dealt with before, Rachel sighed heavily. Then maybe it's time to consider other possibilities? Have you considered the idea that this might not be entirely natural? Emily froze. Was Rachel suggesting what she thought she was? Are you saying you believe it's sentient? She asked cautiously. I'm saying we can't rule it out, Rachel replied. And if it is, we need to figure out how to communicate with it before it's too late. That night, Emily lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the conversation with Rachel over and over again. Could the planet really be alive? And if it was, why was it acting now? What did it want from them? Questions swirled in her head, each one more unsettling than the last. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was a chance to make things right. The next morning, Emily and Daniel returned to the lab determined to unravel the mystery. They spent hours analyzing the energy patterns, searching for clues that might reveal the source of the signals. Finally, they hit a breakthrough. Buried beneath miles of ocean floor, hidden away from human eyes, was a massive structure. Its shape was irregular, almost organic, and it emitted the same pulsating energy they detected earlier. Whatever it was enormous, and it was ancient. This changes everything, Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. We have to go there. Emily nodded slowly, her heart pounding. She knew he was right. If they wanted answers, they had to confront this thing head on. But as she stared at the image on the screen, a chill ran down her spine. Deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into uncharted territory. And once they crossed that line, there would be no turning back. Little did they know, the entity beneath the waves was already watching and waiting. The world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Strange events that once seemed isolated were now happening everywhere, and the fear gripping humanity grew with each passing day. Governments scrambled to respond, but their efforts felt futile against forces they couldn't understand. Lieutenant Rachel Morgan stood in a crowded room at a military command center, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she listened to updates from field agents. Reports poured in from every corner of the globe, massive sinkholes swallowing entire neighborhoods, rivers boiling without explanation, and skies filled with eerie glowing clouds. The planet itself seemed to be rebelling. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her sharp eyes scanning the faces around her. Most of the people in the room looked exhausted, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dread. She knew exactly how they felt. For weeks, she had been trying to make sense of the chaos, but nothing added up. It wasn't just bad luck or random natural disasters. Something bigger was at play, something none of them fully understood yet. Her thoughts drifted to Emily Carter, the scientist who had first brought the strange energy readings to her attention. If anyone could help unravel this mystery, it was Emily. Rachel decided to pay her another visit. She drove through the desolate streets of Colorado, where abandoned cars and shattered windows told the story of a society on the brink of collapse. When she arrived at the underground research facility, Emily was already waiting for her. The young scientist looked pale and worn out, dark circles under her eyes betraying countless sleepless nights. Despite her exhaustion, there was a spark of determination in her gaze. I think we're getting closer, Emily said without preamble, leading Rachel into the lab. On one of the monitors, a series of complex graphs and charts flickered. These signals, they're not random, they're deliberate. Rachel frowned, leaning closer to examine the screen. Deliberate? You mean like communication? Emily nodded. Exactly. Whatever's causing these disturbances isn't just reacting. It's sending messages. And I think I've started to decode some of them. Rachel's stomach tightened. Communication implied intelligence, and intelligence meant intent. What does it say? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's hard to translate directly, but the gist is clear, Emily replied hesitantly. It's warning us. Push us too far, then see what happens. That's the message. Rachel stared at her, stunned. Push who too far? What does that even mean? I think it means Earth itself, Emily said softly. Whatever this thing is, it's tied to the planet. Maybe it's some kind of guardian, or maybe it's the planet's consciousness. Either way, it's angry. Angry, the word hung heavy in the air between them. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. If Earth itself was alive and furious, then humanity was in more trouble than anyone had realized. She shook her head, trying to focus. We need to tell someone higher up. This isn't just a scientific discovery. It's a global threat. Emily hesitated, biting her lip. I don't know if that's such a good idea. If governments hear about this, they might try to weaponize it. Or worse, attack it. We can't risk provoking it further. Rachel understood her concerns, but time was running out. People were dying by the thousands, and panic was spreading like wildfire. They couldn't keep this information hidden forever. We'll handle it carefully, she promised. But we can't do this alone. We need help. Reluctantly, Emily agreed. Together, they drafted a report summarizing their findings and sent it to a select group of military and scientific leaders. Within hours, the response came back. A special task force would be assembled to address the crisis. Rachel was put in charge, tasked with coordinating efforts between scientists like Emily and military personnel responsible for maintaining order. As the days passed, tensions rose both inside and outside the facility. Protests erupted in cities around the world, with crowds demanding answers. Some blamed technology, shouting slogans about returning to simpler ways of life. Others called for war, insisting that humanity fight back against whatever force was threatening them. Amid the chaos, rumors spread about Project Echo and its role in uncovering the truth. Journalists camped outside the facility, desperate for any scrap of information. Inside, the pressure mounted. Emily and Daniel worked tirelessly to refine their understanding of the signals, while Rachel tried to keep everyone focused on finding solutions rather than assigning blame. But not everyone shared their cautious approach. Daniel, in particular, grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of action. He believed that diplomacy was a waste of time and that humanity needed to prepare for battle. We can't just sit here and wait for it to destroy us, he snapped during one heated argument. If this thing is as powerful as you say, we need weapons. Something to defend ourselves. Emily shook her head firmly. That's exactly what it doesn't want. Attacking it will only make things worse. And doing nothing will get us killed. Daniel shot back. Their arguments became frequent, straining the fragile unity of the team. Meanwhile, Gaia, the name Emily had given the entity, continued to demonstrate its power. Massive fissures opened across continents, splitting apart roads, buildings, and lives. Oceans surged unexpectedly, flooding coastal regions and displacing millions. Entire ecosystems collapsed overnight, leaving behind barren wastelands. Billions of people were forced to flee their homes, seeking safety in overcrowded shelters or risking death in the wilderness. Through it all, Gaia remained silent until one fateful night. As Rachel sat in her office reviewing reports, an alarm blared through the facility. She rushed to the main lab, where Emily and Daniel were staring wide-eyed at a monitor. On the screen, a new signal pulsed brightly, stronger and clearer than anything they'd seen before. It's broadcasting again, Emily said, her voice trembling. But this time, it's different. Rachel stepped closer, watching as the signal resolved into a series of images. At first they were abstract shapes, but soon they coalesced into recognizable forms: forests burning, oceans choked with plastic, animals lying dead in fields. Then came the final image, a barren, lifeless planet, its surface cracked and scorched beyond recognition. What does it mean? Rachel asked, her throat dry. It's showing us the future, Emily whispered. If we don't change, this is what's coming. The implications hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. Gaia wasn't just angry, it was giving humanity a choice. Change or perish, there was no middle ground, no compromise. The message was clear, and it left no room for doubt. For the first time, Rachel truly understood the gravity of their situation. This wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption. Humanity had pushed Earth to its limits, and now it was time to face the consequences. Whether they rose to the challenge or succumbed to despair would determine the fate of the entire planet. As the night wore on, Rachel found herself reflecting on the enormity of the task ahead. She thought about the billions of lives depending on her leadership, the fractured world she was trying to hold together, and the mysterious entity beneath the waves that held the key to their salvation or destruction. One thing was certain: whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The world had become a place of fear and division. With billions displaced and entire cities swallowed by the ground, society was breaking apart. People no longer trusted their leaders or each other. Some blamed technology for awakening the entity beneath the waves, calling it humanity's punishment for playing God. Others saw the disasters as proof that Earth itself was alive and vengeful, punishing them for centuries of abuse. Amid the chaos, factions formed, each with its own solution to the crisis. In one corner were those who believed in peace and reconciliation. They argued that humanity needed to change its ways, to heal the planet instead of exploiting it. Emily Carter became their reluctant figurehead. Her work decoding Gaia's messages made her a symbol of hope, though she often felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. She spent her days explaining the importance of cooperation and urging people to see the bigger picture. But not everyone listened. On the other side were those who refused to back down. They saw Gaia's warnings as a declaration of war and believed humanity should fight back. Daniel Brooks led this group, his frustration boiling over into anger. He couldn't accept the idea of surrendering to an unknown force. To him, survival meant taking control, even if it meant destroying the entity threatening them. His arguments gained traction among rogue elements within the military, who began stockpiling weapons and planning attacks on the submerged structure. Rachel Morgan found herself caught between these two extremes. As the leader of the task force, she was responsible for keeping order and guiding humanity through the crisis. But the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every decision she made was scrutinized, every action questioned. Some called her weak for siding with Emily, while others accused her of being too soft to take decisive action. The tension left her sleepless and exhausted, but she refused to give up. One evening, after another long day of meetings and arguments, Rachel sought out Emily in the lab. The young scientist was hunched over her computer, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "How are you holding up?" Rachel asked, leaning against the doorway. Emily glanced up, offering a tired smile. "I've been better," she admitted. "It feels like no matter what I say, half the world thinks I'm crazy, and the other half wants me to fix everything overnight." "You're doing your best," Rachel said firmly. "That's all anyone can ask for," Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just wish I knew what to do next. We've decoded the messages, we've explained the warnings, but how do we get people to actually listen?" Rachel didn't have an answer. Instead, she changed the subject. "Have you heard from Daniel lately?" Emily shook her head. "Not since our last argument. Why?" "He's been meeting with some of the military officers behind closed doors," Rachel said cautiously. "I think he's planning something." Emily's eyes widened. "Planning what?" "I don't know yet," Rachel admitted. "But whatever it is, it can't be good." Daniel's plan came to light sooner than either of them expected. Late one night, alarms blared throughout the facility, startling everyone awake. Rachel grabbed her jacket and rushed to the main lab, where a group of soldiers stood guarding the entrance. Inside, Daniel was pacing back and forth, his expression tense but determined. "What's going on here?" Rachel demanded, pushing. "Past the guards. We're taking matters into our own hands," Daniel replied without hesitation. "If we don't act now, Gaia will destroy us all." "Act how?" Rachel asked, her voice rising. "What are you planning to do?" Daniel gestured to a table covered in blueprints and schematics. "We're building weapons capable of neutralizing the entity. If we strike first, we can end this before it gets worse." Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "You're insane. Attacking it will only provoke it further. Haven't you seen what happens when it retaliates?" "That's why we need to hit it hard enough to stop it for good," Daniel shot back. "We can't keep sitting around waiting for it to kill us." Emily stepped forward, her face pale. "This isn't the answer, Daniel." Violence won't solve anything. We need to find a way to communicate, to show Gaia that we're willing to change, Daniel scoffed. And what if it doesn't care? What if it's already decided that humanity deserves to die? Before Emily could respond, Rachel stepped between them. Enough, she said firmly. This isn't helping anyone. If you go through with this, you'll be putting billions of lives at risk, including your own. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. Then he turned away, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Rachel, but I can't stand by and do nothing. As he walked out of the lab, followed by the soldiers, Rachel felt a sinking feeling in her chest. She knew Daniel's actions would have consequences, and she feared they wouldn't be able to stop him in time. The next few days were a blur of activity. Emily and Rachel worked tirelessly to counteract Daniel's plans, reaching out to allies within the military and scientific community. They warned anyone who would listen about the dangers of provoking Gaia further, but their efforts seemed futile. Meanwhile, strange occurrences continued to plague the planet. Rivers ran dry, crops withered in the fields, and storms raged unchecked. It was as if Gaia was growing impatient, its warnings turning into outright threats. Then one morning, disaster struck. A massive earthquake shook the region, collapsing buildings and sending people fleeing for their lives. At the same time, reports came in of missile launches targeting the submerged structure. Daniel's plan was underway. Rachel sprang into action, gathering a small team to intercept the attack. Among them were Marcus Lee, a marine biologist familiar with deep-sea environments, and Claire Bennett, a linguist skilled in deciphering complex languages. Together they raced toward the ocean, hoping to reach the structure before it was too late. The journey was perilous. Violent currents battered their vessel, and jagged rocks threatened to tear it apart. Along the way, they discovered remnants of ancient civilizations buried beneath the waves, artifacts hinting at previous encounters with Gaia. Each discovery reinforced the urgency of their mission. When they finally reached the structure, they were awestruck by its beauty. Towering crystalline formations pulsed with light, resonating with the rhythm of Earth's heartbeat. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a testament to the power of the entity within. Emily activated the communication device, her hands trembling. As she adjusted the settings, for a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, Gaia responded, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Through Claire's translations, Emily conveyed humanity's remorse and desire to heal the planet. Gaia acknowledged their efforts but warned that trust must be earned. It agreed to halt its attacks temporarily, giving humanity one final chance to prove itself worthy of coexistence. As the team returned to the surface, they knew the battle wasn't over. Daniel's actions had reignited Gaia's fury, and the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity had been given a second chance, and it was up to them to seize it. The journey back to the surface was tense and exhausting. Emily, Rachel, Marcus, and Claire barely spoke as their vessel fought against the violent currents of the ocean. Each of them knew the weight of what they had just accomplished, and the fragility of the truce they had brokered with Gaia. The entity had agreed to pause its attacks, but it made no promises about forgiveness or trust. Humanity had been given a chance to prove itself, but that chance came with conditions. Change was required, and change would not come easily. When they finally emerged from the water, the world above was in chaos. News of Daniel's failed attack had spread quickly, sparking outrage and fear. The missiles he launched had done little damage to the structure, but they had triggered another wave of disasters. Earthquakes shook cities already on the brink of collapse, and massive tsunamis flooded coastal regions. Millions more were displaced, adding to the billions who had already lost their homes. People were angry not just at Daniel, but at everyone involved in Project Echo. They wanted answers, and they wanted someone to blame. Rachel took charge immediately, calling an emergency meeting with the remaining members of the task force. The room was packed, filled with scientists, military personnel, and government officials. Tensions were high, and voices rose in heated arguments before Rachel even entered. She slammed her fist on the table to silence the crowd, her sharp gaze cutting through the noise. We don't have time for this, she said firmly. If we don't act now, there won't be a future to fight for. Emily stood beside her, clutching a folder filled with notes from their encounter with Gaia. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as she began to explain what had happened beneath the waves. She described the crystalline structure, the pulsating energy, and the communication they had established. Gaia wasn't just a force of nature, it was intelligent, aware, and deeply connected to the planet. It had listened to their plea, but it had also issued a clear warning. Humanity's second chance would not last forever. As Emily spoke, some people nodded in understanding, while others looked skeptical or outright hostile. One man, a military officer named Captain Lewis, spoke up, his tone laced with frustration. So what are you saying? We're supposed to roll over and let this thing dictate our lives? No, Rachel interjected sharply. We're saying we need to adapt. If we want to survive, we have to change the way we live. That means no more exploiting resources, no more polluting the air and water, and no more ignoring the consequences of our actions. And how do you propose we do that? Lewis shot back. You think people will just stop using electricity? Or driving cars because some alien entity told us to? It's not about stopping everything overnight, Emily said, stepping forward. It's about finding sustainable ways to meet our needs without destroying the planet. Renewable energy, reforestation, cleaner industries, we've known about these solutions for years. We just haven't acted on them, Lewis snorted. Easier said than done. It has to be done, Rachel said firmly. Because if it isn't, none of us will make it through this. The argument continued for hours, but eventually a fragile consensus emerged. Governments around the world agreed to implement sweeping changes, though many did so reluctantly. Factories powered by fossil fuels were shut down and replaced with solar panels and wind turbines. Industrial practices were reformed to minimize waste, and massive reforestation projects were launched to restore damaged ecosystems. Billions of dollars were redirected toward research and development of sustainable technologies. Despite these efforts, resistance remained. Some groups refused to comply, believing that humanity couldn't survive without exploiting Earth's resources. Others saw the reforms as an opportunity to seize power, using the crisis to further their own agendas. Violence erupted in several regions as protests turned into riots. Cities burned, and the death toll climbed higher every day amid the turmoil. Emily and Rachel worked tirelessly to keep the peace. They traveled across the globe, meeting with leaders and communities to explain the urgency of the situation. Emily's calm demeanor and scientific expertise helped win over skeptics, while Rachel's no-nonsense approach commanded respect even from those who disagreed with her methods. Together, they became symbols of hope in a world teetering on the edge of collapse, but not everyone shared their vision. Daniel Brooks remained a thorn in their side, rallying supporters to his cause. He believed that humanity's survival depended on dominance, not cooperation. To him, Gaia was nothing more than a threat that needed to be eliminated. His followers grew bolder, launching covert operations to sabotage the reforms and destabilize the fragile truce. One night, as Emily and Rachel reviewed progress reports in the lab, an urgent message came through. A group of rogue operatives led by Daniel had infiltrated a key facility responsible for developing renewable energy technology. Their goal was to destroy the equipment and discredit the reforms. Rachel sprang into action, assembling a small team to intercept them. Among the volunteers were Marcus and Claire, who had become trusted allies during their journey to the submerged structure. Armed with determination rather than weapons, they raced to the facility. Knowing that failure could undo everything they had worked for, the confrontation was intense. Daniel and his men had already begun dismantling the equipment when Rachel and her team arrived. Voices echoed through the cavernous space as both sides shouted accusations and demands. For a moment, it seemed like violence was inevitable. Daniel, "Stop," Rachel shouted, stepping between him and the machinery. "You're making things worse." "You don't understand," Daniel replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "This isn't about saving the planet, it's about control. If we give in to this thing, we lose everything." No, Daniel, Emily said, stepping forward. If we don't change, we lose everything anyway. This isn't about giving up, it's about surviving. For a long moment, Daniel hesitated. His eyes darted between Rachel, Emily, and the destruction he had set in motion. Finally, he lowered his weapon, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he muttered. Do what you want. But when this fails, don't say I didn't warn you. With Daniel's surrender, the immediate threat was neutralized. The team worked quickly to repair the damage and secure the facility. As they left, Rachel placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I know you're scared, she said quietly. We all are. But running away from the problem won't fix anything. Daniel didn't respond, but his expression softened slightly. Whatever doubts he still harbored, he kept them to himself. In the months that followed, the tide began to turn. Slowly, but surely, the reforms took hold. Rivers ran cleaner, forests began to regrow, and wildlife returned to areas once thought lost forever. People adapted to new ways of living, finding joy in simpler pleasures and rediscovering the beauty of nature. Hope blossomed in unexpected places, carried forward by stories of resilience and redemption. Gaia watched silently, its presence felt in the gentle rhythm of the tides and the steady pulse of life returning to the planet. It hadn't forgiven humanity, not yet, but it had given them a chance to prove themselves worthy of coexistence. As Emily stood on a hill overlooking a newly planted forest, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. The scars of the past would never fully heal, but they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much farther they still had to go. Somewhere deep within the earth, Gaia waited, patient and watchful, ready to see what humanity would do next. Years passed, and the world began to heal. Rivers that had once run black with pollution now sparkled in the sunlight, their waters teeming with fish. Forests stretched across landscapes where barren wastelands had stood, their trees reaching skyward as if reclaiming what was lost. Animals returned to places they had abandoned long ago, their calls echoing through valleys and plains. The air smelled fresher, cleaner, carrying with it the promise of renewal. Humanity had learned to live differently, not perfectly, but with purpose. Emily Carter stood on a hill overlooking one of the largest reforestation projects in history. Acres upon acres of green stretched out before her, a testament to what could be achieved when people worked together. She felt a quiet pride swelling in her chest, though she knew better than to take all the credit. This wasn't just her victory, it belonged to everyone who had chosen to believe in change, even when it seemed impossible. Rachel Morgan joined her a few moments later, her boots crunching softly against the dirt path. The years had been kind to her, smoothing some of the sharp edges that once defined her demeanor. She smiled faintly as she looked out at the forest. It's beautiful, she said simply. It is, Emily agreed, nodding. But it's also fragile. We can't forget how close we came to losing everything. Rachel sighed, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. Do you think we've done enough? Or will Gaia decide we're still not worthy? Emily hesitated, considering the question. Gaia had remained silent since the truce, its presence felt only in the subtle rhythms of nature. There were no more warnings, no more displays of power. For all intents and purposes, it seemed content to let humanity find its own way. But Emily knew better than to assume the entity had forgotten or forgiven. It was patient, waiting to see if the changes would last or if old habits would resurface. I don't know, Emily admitted after a moment. But I think we've earned a little trust, at least for now. Rachel nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. Still, it's hard not to wonder. What happens next? Is this the end of the story or just another chapter? Far away, in a bustling city, Daniel Brooks sat alone in a small apartment, staring out at the skyline. He had distanced himself from the events of the past, retreating into obscurity after his failed attempt to sabotage the reforms, though. He still harbored doubts about the direction humanity had taken. He couldn't deny the progress he saw around him. Streets were cleaner, skies clearer, and people seemed happier. Even so, he struggled to shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, balancing between survival and collapse. One evening, as he flipped through news reports about the global recovery efforts, he found himself thinking about Emily and Rachel. They had been right about many things, he realized reluctantly. Humanity couldn't keep taking without giving back. Still, he wondered if they truly understood the cost of their choices. Sacrifices had been made, luxuries given up, industries dismantled, lives altered forever. Was it worth it? He didn't have an answer, and perhaps he never would. All he knew was that the world was different now, and so was he. Back in the countryside, Marcus Lee and Claire Bennett continued their work studying the effects of humanity's newfound harmony with nature. They traveled often, documenting the resurgence of ecosystems and cataloging species thought to be extinct. Their research provided valuable insights into how quickly the planet could recover when given the chance, but it also served as a reminder of how much damage had been done. One afternoon, as they hiked through a dense forest, Marcus paused to examine a cluster of wildflowers blooming near a stream. "Do you think Gaia notices?" he asked suddenly, glancing at Claire. Claire tilted her head, considering the question. "Notices what?" "This," Marcus gestured around them. "The changes we've made. Do you think it knows we're trying?" Claire smiled softly. "I think it does. And I think it's waiting to see if we'll keep trying." Marcus nodded, satisfied with her answer. As they continued their journey, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as scientists, as stewards of the Earth, and as believers in second chances. For most people, life moved forward in quieter ways. Farmers adopted sustainable practices, planting crops that nourished both people and soil. Engineers designed machines powered by renewable energy, ensuring that progress didn't come at the expense of the planet. Teachers educated children about the importance of protecting the environment, instilling values of responsibility and respect for nature. Slowly but surely, humanity began to redefine itself not as conquerors of the earth, but as caretakers of. Of course, there were setbacks. Some regions resisted the reforms, clinging to outdated ways of life. Others faced hardships as industries shifted, leaving workers struggling to adapt. But even in those moments of difficulty, there was resilience. Communities came together to support one another, finding strength in unity and hope in shared goals. Gaia watched silently, its vast consciousness attuned to every heartbeat of the planet. It saw the forests regrow, the rivers run clean, and the skies clear. It felt the steady pulse of life returning to places it had abandoned long ago. Humanity had proven capable of change, of growth, but Gaia knew better than to trust blindly. It waited, patient and watchful, ready to intervene if necessary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily found herself standing on the same hill where she had spoken with Rachel years earlier. The view was breathtaking, the colors of twilight painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel at peace. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly against the dirt. She turned to see Rachel approaching, a familiar smile on her face. "Mind if I join you?" Rachel asked. "Not at all," Emily replied, stepping aside to make room. They stood together in silence. For a while, watching as night fell and stars began to appear in the sky. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't succeeded? If Gaia had decided we weren't worth saving?" "All the time," Emily admitted. "But I try not to dwell on it. What matters is that we did succeed, at least for now." Rachel nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're right. Still, it's humbling, isn't it? Knowing how close we came to losing everything." "It is," Emily agreed, "but it's also a reminder. A reminder that we're capable of more than we think. That even when things seem hopeless, there's always a chance to turn things around." Rachel smiled faintly. "You sound like you're starting to believe in happy endings." Emily chuckled softly. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just grateful for the ending we got." As they stood there, side by side, the world stretched out before them, a patchwork of greens and blues, scars and triumphs. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. Humanity had been given a second chance, and they had risen to meet it. Whether they would continue to do so remained to be seen, but for now, hope burned brightly, carried forward by the belief that redemption was always within reach.